On today's episode of Boundary Breakers, I'm honored to have two-time Nobel Peace Prize nominee Steve Killelea. Steve is an Australian entrepreneur that generated significant wealth early on after selling his business and has devoted the rest of his life to solving some of society's most complex problems, like severe poverty and violence. Steve's one of the most interesting, smart, yet humble people that I've ever encountered. Learned a ton on this episode, and I think you're going to love it. Boundary Breakers is brought to you by Carter and Clark. My hope is that thousands of people watch this and become interested and intrigued, not only of what you've done and what you've accomplished, but what you're really pushing on at the moment to drive some interest and some traffic there. And so I want to make sure that we spend a good bit of time focusing on that toward the end, and that give you the opportunity to tell the audience sort of where they can go if they're interested in some of these topics. What I would love to do, if it's okay with you, I would love to just start off briefly. If you could just give us a little bit of your background and tell us sort of, where you grew up and where you came from. It's nice for the audience to be able to just, sort of just a little origin story so the audience can understand who you are and where you came from. And then I'd love to walk through some of the fascinating things that you have done and been involved in. So you want to start there with your background?
Yeah, so my name's Steve Killelea, and grew up in Sydney, Australia, up along the northern beaches. So grew up in an environment where there was a lot of bush. As kids, you never had to really worry about any of the safety issues we do these days. My mum and dad, they just let me go out wandering as long as I came home for a bit of lunch or told them where I was for lunch, then came back and dinner. It was great. So my life was one of sort of adventure. I can remember going around and hanging around creeks. But also grew up near the beaches, so I started surfing at a very, very young age. And surfing became one of the dominant things of my life. In fact, I look at the surfing, in many ways that set the stage for me later on. I did leave school early. I left school at just turned 16. That's unusual for someone with a high-tech background. Well, maybe not so. But from there, I spent a lot of time, I guess the early part of my life was just exploring life. Did a lot of surfing, travelled to Indonesia, and spent a lot of time in some very, very remote places surfing. In fact, living with the families in Indonesia, and sort of give you an idea of what that was like. I was living in the family house, and I paid 40 cents for a room at night, and then I'd have 3 meals at 20 cents a day. And so this was subsistence living, but it did finance my surfing. In fact, I guess I've always been an entrepreneur. I can remember being at school, and even at 8 years old, everyone would be betting on marbles at school. So I'd go home, buy some marbles, and then just practice till I got really good, and go up to the school and only play with the kids I could beat. And then eventually I got really good at the marbles. And so now I just sell the marbles back to the kids and win them off them again. Now, obviously, as an adult, those kind of techniques aren't particularly, how could I put it, socially acceptable. But it did give me an idea of entrepreneurship. And I guess even in Indonesia, like this is the ages of maybe 21, so I set up an import business back to Australia to finance my surfing. Not particularly good at it, but it certainly financed my surfing.
I love it. Well, look, I think you're right. Look, I've found personally, and with the people that I've interviewed, that look, entrepreneurs are very often just born, right? There's something that is inside an entrepreneur. This sort of an independent fire that burns, right? That is sometimes can feel a little bit like a curse, that because it can be difficult to put out, but that just is an innate drive for people with that entrepreneurial spirit to constantly create and build. And so it sounds like, from a very early age, you had that in you. And look, I think that's a fascinating story about the marbles, because you were learning, regardless of whether it's socially acceptable or not, you were learning how to be resourceful and how to win, right? Which is sort of what the at least from the commercial side of things, right? That's a big part of the game. But look, I also, just for what it's worth, wanted to say I absolutely love Australia. You're in Sydney right now, right? Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. So I lived in Melbourne, Australia, for 6 months when I was 20 years old, and it was one of the best experiences of my life. Was able to go to New Zealand, Sydney, all up the Gold Coast, and Australia is a special place, and I look forward to going back soon. So that's God's country down there, for sure.
Thank you.
For sure. Yeah. Well, so tell us. So you mentioned your the import company that you started in Indonesia. Tell us about sort of your first, real big step as an entrepreneur in terms of career-wise. In your mind, what was that, first big boy, if you will, kind of career?
Sure. So what happened is I spent a lot of time traveling the world, surfing, just really living life. And about 25, I decided, well, it's time to settle down. And so I thought, what did I want to do? So the first one was to take people on their venture trips around the world. So there'd be whitewater rafting down the Zambezi, hiking through the Annapurnas, that kind of stuff. But I figured by 35 I'd be too old to do it anymore. But that would have been a mistake. So in the end, I just would have created a business around it. Wanted to do social work, and I figured there wasn't enough money. And at that stage, this is the early 70s, I had the concept I wanted to do computing. And I'd never seen a computer at that stage, and a cheap computer was about $5 million. And I just intuitively ran with it. And in the end, the other two did happen. So now went off, became a very young trainee programmer at 27. And then sort of eventually, I got up to about 32 and I was married and separated from my wife. And at that stage, I developed a computer program which monitored the internals of the very large, the highest availability computer systems in the world. And so I was going to use it as a calling card to head up a research and development team in Silicon Valley. So I split up with my wife. I decided I wanted to pay her out of her half the house. So simplistically, I thought, well, if I sell 3 copies of this program, then I'll be able to sell her out of her half the house. As it was, then went out, had no money. So I went out and approached 2 guys I knew fairly well. Said, look, I'll give you a percentage of the royalties which come through if you program it for free. Then, because at this stage we're talking multi-million-dollar computers. So I approached another person, a bank I knew, and said, well, look, if you develop this program, I'll give it to you for free. Can you give me some time after 5 o'clock? He said, yes. I did it. Approached some other people I knew that had a consulting company but wanted to get into product. And their eyes lit up with glee when they saw me. Mark worked with them. 4 years later, I had enough money to retire and a global product. Wow.
That is an amazing story. And as you were explaining, the summary version, it reminded me of almost exactly what you did with the marbles. It sounds like you are just innately resourceful in terms of really sort of taking a step back and looking at a situation and saying, all right, how can I'm here. I'd like to get over there. What's around me? And what do I need in order to make this happen? Is that a recurring theme throughout your life?
Yeah, look, in many ways I've been highly influenced by areas of Buddhist philosophy. And so, look, part of it, I could just say, is go with the flow. And in Buddhist philosophy, there's this concept of dependent arising. And we don't arise independently of stuff around us. In the West, most of us think we've sort of got control over our lives. And this interview is moving that way, isn't it? We've got control over our lives. We make all the decisions about what happens to us. But if you think about it, we are dependent on what arises around us. So if you look, we're not here because we really decided to be here. We are, but it's more that there's a whole progression of technology which has happened. And we didn't invent the headphones we're using, nor the computer systems which were coming through. So we arise, and the language we're using isn't our own language. We learned it from our mothers. And similarly, if we look at it, most of what's around us is actually arisen somewhere else. So we can move within it. And so the idea really is if you can understand the flow, you just flow within it. And so there's some truth in that. And that's part of it, I guess. It's not about being too hung up on preconceived, to put it more practically, preconceived ideas of what's going to happen. We all know the old principle, a good business plan is only good on the first day you start using it. You have to adjust as you go. And so quite often those adjustments become quite painful and we can push back against them. But if we can just look at what's happening around us and saying, well, that's the direction things are going. It's not what I planned, but let's start moving with it. That's flowing with dependent arising.
That's fascinating, Steve. So where's the balance or the sort of the juxtaposition between accepting that philosophy in terms of sort of going with the flow and, pushing against the flow to create something new, right? Because, I mean, sort of the fundamental premise of being an entrepreneur.
Yeah, no, look, it's a really good point. So I'll try and put it in a bit of an analogy, if you like. And obviously, you can already tell I operate instinctively. But let's say it's a river. You've got a strong flow down the river, but you've got also current and eddies. You can now paddle against the currents and eddies to get where you want to go, but it's very hard not to go with the flow of the direction of the river.
Okay, I got you. Interesting. And is there any type of sort of moral dilemma, or what's the cost of within that philosophy? What's the cost of going against the flow if the foundation or the fundamental premise is that the way forward is to go with the flow?
Yeah, well, I think there was a bit of an analogy, so we don't want to get too caught up on the pedanticness of it.
No. And I certainly didn't mean to with the river. I'm more interested because I think that there's a lot that can be learned from. Yeah. I think you're exactly right. I think we're caught up in Western culture is very much caught up about, we control everything. And I think that it's some of the Eastern philosophies and Buddhism, I think are very, very insightful. And I'm just trying to learn a little bit more to understand. That's all.
So, look, I guess in the end, you've got an instinctive concept, your instinctive feeling of whether things are really moving against you. So let's face it. So some things happen. So one of the companies I set up, one of the technology companies we set up, technological change moved against us. Okay, there's nothing you can do to really change the flow of the technological change other than sort of look and try and adapt. And that means bringing in new products, maybe a new product line, a totally different area, or moving into that changing technology and adopting it. So that'd be one example. Another thing would be an example where you sort of be pushing back against it. So really, two of the principles I think of the success is really hard work. I don't know a really good entrepreneur who doesn't work 60 to 80 hours a week. Okay, that's the reality. And so that's the first thing. But the other thing is just being smart, intelligent. And intelligence, we're all born with an innate IQ, but we can all learn. And it's a matter of really being able to learn what you need to do at the right time, which is applicable for what you're doing. And so,
got it. Okay.
So an example of that might be is if you've got a growth company, and a lot of us have been through this one, So you're just trying to hire the right people. A lot of the time it's really hard, particularly when you're a young entrepreneur. You haven't got a lot of experience. You can't necessarily pick the right people either. So it's just a matter of pushing forward. Or if you're getting a whole lot of, we've used the word crap, from staff, for example, you've just got to push through it. You don't go with the flow. Gotcha.
No, it connected with me there as you were speaking, and it sounds like it's more of a perspective, and I think I was looking at it from far too narrowly. But look, I don't want to get too hung up on that. I just think that it's really interesting, and I think the audience will as well. Look, you are remarkably successful, accomplished, I'll say, based on a lot of the things you've done in your life that I hope we'll talk to. And so little tidbits like that are sort of a lot of what the show is about, right? Because I think that that's obviously been a big part of it's been part of your success in terms of your outlook and how your perspective and how you see the world. And so that's the only reason I was picking on that, or picking through that, wanted to talk about it more, but very, very fascinating. So, all right. So at what age did you have enough money to retire on? When did you sell your technology company? How old?
Sure. Yeah. So they set up two high-tech companies. First one ended up the publicly listed on NASDAQ. That was a company called Enlightened Solutions. I actually pulled out of that at the point which it publicly listed. So that was my exit. And the second one was set up on the Australian Stock Exchange. So we'll move through to the second one. So the point of setting that up, then I certainly really made a lot of money. So at that point I set up a family foundation to work with the poorest of the poor. And that comes back to that concept of being a social worker. There was just, so I've got this, some part of me which is slightly empathetic. So I looked at setting up this foundation to work with the poorest of the poor. And so what that did, that then got me into a lot of the poorest places in the world. And a lot of those poorest places actually are in conflict zones or near post-war zones. So I spent a lot of time moving through them. So the foundation now, since setting it up, we've probably done about 250 projects around the world. Got direct beneficiaries. At last count was 3.7 million people. And that's direct, and it's not a marketing number either. It's a real one.
Gosh, that's unbelievable. And this is, I really want to spend some time focusing on this because I think it's remarkable. And you somebody that experiences what you did in terms of financial success early on. There are a lot of different choices you can make with your life at that point, right? The freedom that type of wealth brings, and we see it routinely. A lot of people choose to do different things with their life when they have that freedom. And you mentioned the desire to be a social worker early on, and you've chosen to focus on helping people that are disadvantaged or don't have the opportunities or might be facing violence. Is that something that is just sort of part of who you are, that's been in your being since you can remember?
Yeah, I think it's probably always been there. So there's a lot of people who've got much bigger hearts than me, so I don't want to get carried away with the too far on the empathetic side. But I guess really get past about $250 million. How much more money do you need? Is it what? And like realistically, unless you're buying a $100 million yachts and your Boeing 707s to fly you around the world, how much money do you actually need? So if you think about $250 million, you invest that, you've got a 5% yield off it. That's $12.5 million a year. Does anyone need any more money than that to actually have the pretty good lifestyle? You probably don't. You can still buy your private jets out of that kind of revenue stream. And you can still buy some pretty nice yachts. So the question then is, what is the utility and value of money? So you can leave it to your kids, and that's a very good thing to do. So I've got 4 kids, 12 grandkids, and certainly I'm not going to leave them short of money. But how much do you really need to leave them so that they've got a good, comfortable life? And like in some ways, you want them to be able to sort of manage, and then for their kids, leave the right values so those kids will have a strong work ethic, work hard, and do something constructive as well. So I guess there's all that kind of thinking goes into the background. But really, it was just once I'd made a lot of money, I just then thought, well, gee, I want to do something with it. Sort of the idea of, it's just intuitive, really, is to work with the poorest of the poor, because that's where you get the biggest bang for the buck. So, for example, first project I did was in Laos, still a closed country. And so went in there with World Vision, actually, and we put in some pumps to provide clean water. So did it for about 40,000 people over a number of years. It's less than $20 a head to put the water in. And at that stage, they had one of the highest death rates for children under 5 at about 18%. Put the water in, dropped the death rate to 12, and then got rid of the 30% of all the disease because it was waterborne. And so at that point, then I was hooked on the value of it. So similarly, like if you go into schools in Africa, and there were really poor areas, and by introducing a feeding program at lunchtime, which might cost you 2 cents a student, just giving them porridge, what you can do there is you've now got the nutrition so the kids' brains can concentrate through the afternoon. So we worked with this project down in Uganda with the guy there, had one of the Rotary clubs actually, a brilliant guy. And he did a literacy program in the school and adopted one of our peace frameworks, used that, and they literally doubled the academic attainment rate by putting in this feeding program at lunchtime. So they had 30% of the kids that get into the top 2 divisions in the district. After the program, another 6 months later, they had 60%. So it's little things. And this is 2 cents a kid a day. Do you realise when someone's starving, you can keep them alive for about 30 cents a day until sort of the war's finished or until the drought breaks.
Wow. No, I did not know that. And that's fascinating. I'd love to explore a little bit this intersection between helping the poorest of the poor and where that intersects with violence and conflict. And well, then we can talk about the Global Peace Index and all the other things you've done. But I'm interested, and you touched on it a minute ago, but that your initial objective was to help the poorest of the poor. Did you find that was a sort of a natural intersection, that oftentimes the poorest of the poor were also in conflict zones, or that violence, there's a link there? How did those two connect for you, and when?
Yeah, look, that's excellent, and that's exactly right. So I never realised it at the time, but I ended up now spending a lot of time in these war zones, near post-war zones, because that's where the poorest are. So one of the intersections, so we put out a number of major reports. One's Global Peace Index, Global Terrorism Index, and an Ecological Threat Report. So what you find is the worst ecological degradation, the worst poverty and conflict all go together. Really? as is a lot of the time the weakest governments in the world. So it's this mix of things which go together. So what happened, and again, this is just a classic entrepreneurial story. I was in northeast Kivu in the Congo. It's one of the more violent places in the world. and was walking through there, and I started to think, well, what are the opposite of all these stressed out nations I'm spending time in? What are the most peaceful nations in the world? And is there anything I could learn from them to bring back into the projects I'm doing? No, this was about 18 years ago. And so this was just really a fantasy question. Got back to Sydney, searched the internet, couldn't find a list of the nations of the world by their peacefulness. I thought, well, that's a good idea to do. So I discussed it with a friend who ran the Sydney Peace Foundation at the time. He didn't know of anything. So I had a guy working for me who used to run the Economist Intelligence Unit in London, part of the Economist Group. He says, well, they're the world's experts in producing indexes. So went over, met them, developed the philosophy for what I wanted in the basic domains I wanted measured, and the approach. And then they went away, sourced the indicators, got the data and produced the first index. But we got down to the last few weeks of that, and I was thinking, last month of it probably, and maybe 2 months. And I'm thinking, well, it's no good sitting on it. So then I went and approached a PR company in London and said, well, I want to do a global campaign around this when we release it. And they've gone, sure. And the thing turned out to be an international publicity success. And that's how the Institute for Economics and Peace was born. It was just a simple set of steps. And what I realised, the more I looked at it, the more I realised we knew very, very little about peace. It's mainly a moral judgment. Okay, it's an expression of our ethics. There's nothing wrong with it. It's good, but not grounded in data. Like having a data background, that's how I think. So, if you think about it, so we'll look at the Global Peace Index. That's the first global measure of the peacefulness of countries globally. But if you can't measure something, can you truly understand it? If you can't measure it, how do you know that whether your actions are helping you or hindering in achieving your goals? You simply don't. And as a business guy, we all see that. We all see it. And then what I realised further, when we're studying peace, we're generally not studying peace, we're studying violence. And so I started to think more about that. There's a whole journey on the study of peace, and the best way I can do it is the study of peace is very different from the study of violence and how to stop violence, and they're really important things to do. But to maintain a society which is peaceful and resilience, you need a whole different set of qualities to what you need to stop the conflict. So the best way of looking at it is an analogy. So you think of the human body. So great breakthroughs with pathology. We're not going to go over heart attack young. Cancers we're now curing, incredibly important. But it wasn't until we started to study healthy people did we know how to stay healthy. Right exercise, good mental disposition, correct diet. Not going to learn any of those things by studying someone on their deathbed. Yeah. So, similarly, if you want to understand peace, study the healthy and understand the factors which are associated with it. So as we moved on from that, we developed this concept called positive peace. It's the attitude, institutions and structures which create and sustain peaceful societies. And again, that came straight back into business. Is what we find is the same qualities which create peace, create a whole lot of other things we think really are important. Higher GDP growth, better measures on well-being and happiness, better performance on the ecology, and better developments on outcome. In fact, the factors, the economic factors which line up with peace, which are startling. We've just put out a piece of research called Business and Peace. So I'd recommend anyone to read it. You can pick it up off the website Vision of Humanity. Now,
we'll put a link to that during the podcast right here. Yeah.
Great. Okay. So now, what we found is that countries which are improving in positive peace, we'll just use the word peace, I think, improving in peace compared to countries deteriorate, on average had 2% per annum higher GDP growth rates. Foreign direct investment was 3 times higher. The currencies tend to appreciate. The sovereign debt ratings get rated better. You find that inflation rates and interest rates are much lower, and inflation rates are somewhere between 7 and 34 times less volatile. So they're just some of the economic factors associated with peace. In fact, we also do a study on the cost of violence to the global economy. So in 2023, that was $17.5 trillion. So to give you an idea of just how big that is, that's more than what it would be if we added 3 new countries to the world the size of Switzerland, Ireland and Denmark. Now, 1% of that, 1%, right, that's the 1.75 trillion, sorry, it's 175 billion, is all the money which gets spent on overseas developmental aid by all countries.
Oh, my gosh. Goodness, that's quite the perspective. Well, you know, what jumps out to me immediately, well, the first thing was the recognition that I don't want to say stumbled upon, that you identified, there was something you identified, that if the goal here is to drive toward being more peaceful, and we don't have any data in terms of what's that model look like, and how does this place compare to others, and so how could we ever really create a sustainable model? And so just the idea in general to create an index for comparative analysis is insightful in and of itself. But what is really interesting is this idea of, are we trying to decrease violence, or are we trying to increase peace? I guess if you got to put the specific conflicts, like the wars and like the specific tribal conflicts aside, but to the extent that what's the societal aim for, nation X, right? Is it to reduce violence, or is it to increase peace? I've never once thought about it that way.
Yeah, that's very good. I'd say it's the two sides of the same coin. You need to do both depending on the level of development of the country. So if you look into the Western, let's say the advanced Western, or Western democracies, for example, so the idea there is really to build the qualities which create for the resilience for sustainable peace. But as we do that also, we get all these other things which we want as well, like better measures on well-being and happiness and better economic performance. So, but on the other hand, if you're in the wrapped by violence in the country, let's say Mexico, that's close to the US, Mexico, and you look at the cartels down there, the same things which will create the peace won't necessarily stop the violence. So you need a really strong effort to fall back to, let's say, beat the cartels. And obviously corruption, it's one of the qualities associated with peace, plays into it. Well-functioning government also plays into it, which is another major quality of peace. But over and above that, you can't be a pacifist, go in and sit down, I'm going to talk reasonably with these people, and they're going to listen to a strong argument on peace, and they're going to see that the whole society will be better off with peace and adopt it. It's not the way the world works.
Right. Right. But look, I learned something. And I think it's to the extent that we all agree that having a less violent, more peaceful society is the goal. I've always heard it framed in terms of reducing violence, regardless of the whether you're talking about a developing country or a particular city in the U.S., right? Like reducing violence. I've never heard it phrased as increasing peace, which you made me think further that it's both sides of the same coin, and you really maybe you shouldn't have one without the other. But it seems to be that if you're working on both, then your chances of achieving the common goal of having a more peaceful society would your odds of getting there would be much better. Is that
exactly? Yeah. So we work regularly with the whole different militaries around the world, as also with the police organisations, as also with peace organisations, because it's the system. Most military people don't want to see their work mates and their other friends go out and get killed in a conflict. They're pretty interested in peace themselves. Similarly with police, most police really are interested in reducing violence as well. And so we can argue sometimes about the techniques and methods which are adopted and the frailties of the human beings in these systems. But again, if you come back and you build the strength of the system, then those frailties are much less likely to come to the surface.
So, gosh, I knew I was going to be fascinated and this was going to be an interesting topic, but this is really, it's even more interesting than I thought. So would it be fair to say that you started sort of this, you started your journey in terms of wanting to help the less fortunate, looking for the poorest of the poor, and that journey led you to ask some questions about what, in order to help the poorest of the poor, what levers do we need to be pulling here, right? What are the things, what are the different things that might impact being or becoming the poorest of the poor or having poor people? Is it a symptom of something else, or is it sort of a symptom, or is it disconnected from other things? And it sounds to me, I don't want to put words in your mouth, it sounds to me what you have found is that there are a variety of different levers that impact economic success and having the poorest of the poor in a particular society. A major one being whether or not the country is more peaceful or more violent. Am I tracking?
Sure. So I'll come back to the positive peace index and what really differentiates the work we do. So we've got about 50,000 different data sets now, indexes, attitudinal surveys, collated at the country level. So it's one of the larger data sets in the world at that level. So what we do is we work with the Global Peace Index, which is a measure of global peacefulness. Then we do mathematical modelling, statistical analysis against that to determine the qualities of which most closely associated with peace. So what we do then is we run other statistical techniques, PCA type techniques and such, to clump those qualities together. So that now comes out into 8 different clumps, which we now call the pillars of positive peace. And now we then turn that round into another index. Turning it around into another index, we take each of those 8 clumps, 3 indicators per clump, and then the weighing of the indicators according to the strength of the correlations with peace. It's not our judgments at all. So what we've got is a totally empirically derived methodology to determine what creates peace. And that's what separates the work we're doing, is that it's empirically based. And so we take that, now we can turn that round into another index. Now we can measure the projection of the societies towards or away from the underlying qualities which create peace. And so taking this framework, we've got mechanisms where we can pretty much look a decade out and pick countries which are going to deteriorate in peace with a 90% accuracy rate.
Wow. You know what that reminds me of is, as an entrepreneur with employees, one of the things we do is if there's a particular employee in a particular department that just excels and does really well, then, and this isn't unique to us. A lot of entrepreneurs do this. They want to get sort of a personality profile of that particular individual so that they can go find other new hires and bring in people with similar traits, similar characteristics. When you were describing that, it sounds to me like that is similar to what you're doing with this initiative, or with everything that you're doing with Positive Peace, in that you have identified sort of the attributes that end up creating or fostering peace, and then you're able to use that for comparative analysis against other places, but also to be able to see, is it getting closer or further, to be able to even project whether a particular country, society, or area in the future will be better, more peaceful, or less peaceful.
Yeah, societies work as systems. And so the positive peace frameworks is a shortcut to understand a societal system. So systems are self-regulating, and they're a bit like perpetual motion. They're moving in a particular direction, and they're self-reinforcing in terms of the direction they're moving in. So what you can tell is you now start to look at the nations and move them over time. You can determine the momentum or trajectory on which they're going. And that's a profound mechanism to be able to understand what's improving and what's not. Now, we look at positive peace, and we look at it up to COVID. Every year it was improving. Now, other than one of the domains called attitudes, that have been deteriorating, particularly in Western democracies, which we all can see. But since COVID, positive peace has actually fallen off. Now, what we can see also is the countries which are highest in positive peace recovered the fastest after COVID. And that's an example of the resilience which is built in the societal systems, and the positive peace is just a mechanism to be able to measure it.
Wow. So is there also an acceleration variable to this, or is it just trajectory moving toward or away from?
So you've got tipping points, and it's fascinating. You've got a whole range of tipping points which happen when you look at it in terms of peace. And so what happens is you get to a point, per capita income takes off, corruption takes off or disappears. You find a whole range of other things. You don't see it with well-being and happiness. That's more of a straight line. But these other things, they're within these systems, there are tipping points. And when those tipping points are passed, things just go.
Wow.
Either one way or the other. You can, obviously, tipping point, you can pass it while you're improving, or you can pass it while you're deteriorating.
Yeah. God, that's so fascinating. All right, so thank you for being patient with me as I sort of repeat back what you said. I'm just trying to make sure that I understand, exactly what you're doing in your work, which I think I do. And so help us understand. I mean, that's an amazing amount. That's an amazing insight, right? Just the development of that insight is a great step forward. Help us understand what are your thoughts or goals in terms of that? Like, how do we use this data? What are your hopes for how it gets used? And how can we, what is it that you want other people to know about it?
One, I think we're living in an age we just faced with we just look at the global challenges facing us, like the climate change, for example, ever-decreasing biodiversity, full use of fresh water on the planet. Underpinning all them, obviously, is overpopulation. But unless we have a world which is peaceful, we'll never get the levels of trust, cooperation, or inclusive necessary to solve those problems. Therefore, peace is a prerequisite for the survival of society as we know it in the 21st century. And that, my friends, is different than any other epoch in history. So positive peace, when you combine it with the systems thinking, we've got a whole other body of work on systems thinking we haven't spoken about, but if you take positive peace, it's a transformational way of looking about how do we develop society. It's through the lens of peace we're focusing on something which is positive, it's forward-looking rather than backward-looking, and along with peace goes all these other things which we think are really important for the development of a modern society. So therefore, in many ways, positive peace can describe an optimal environment under which human potential can flourish.
Gosh, these are. You used the word profound a few minutes ago. I think that's a really apt description, because these are big ideas, and things that I'll be the first to admit, these are perspectives that I have not looked at these issues through previously. People, I don't know, the listeners may all think I'm crazy. Maybe everyone thinks about this, but like, you know, what I just heard was, look, to the extent that there's somebody that is dedicated and focused on one of the issues that you mentioned, the fabric upon which any of that rests is peace. And the better that fabric, the stronger that foundation, the better chance that we have to tackle the whole myriad of other issues that are sort of impacting the global population at the moment. And has it been your experience that this is sort of a well understood idea, or is this typically sort of revolutionary to people that when you speak about it?
I think it depends on the background of the people actually involved. But if we look at it globally, this is a revolutionary concept and quite profound. And it's a different way of looking at development. So if you want to, I'll move into something a little bit more, how can I put it, profound? Okay?
Yeah, I'd love that.
Yeah,
please.
Hate using the same word twice, but so if you look at the way we think about the world, we do it in business all the time, and governments do it. We think in cause and effect. So now, here's the effect. What was the cause? Let's change the cause so we don't get the effect. We don't get the effect again. So that happens all the time. But cause and effect, that really originates from empiricism. So the concept of empiricism was that you have a cause and effect in the physical world, so the study of the physical world. So the effect would have no influence on the cause. That's why I can take a glass, throw it into the area or a ball, and catch it, and will always come down the same way. And so what that meant for was empiricism. Now, you had experiments which were repeatable. Once I got an experiment in the physical world, did it, pass on the experiment to you, you'd be able to replicate it. And therefore, that now became knowledge. So now, and that's great with massive breakthroughs with technology. But when you're looking at systems, they don't operate like that. In fact, the cause, the effect, comes back and tries to influence the cause. Systems have a concept of homeostasis, steady state. So you've got these, and think of your body. So our societal systems, in many ways, are extension of our biological systems because they're extension of us. But you think about it. You look at the government. It's built around a steady state, trying to create all these mechanisms to maintain a steady state. It wants to grow. So the concept of growth in it. Mm-hmm. Now, in physics, you can take something, break it down in its constituent parts, understand it, put it back together again, it functions the same. So now, think of a clock, think of a car engine. But that's not really true when it comes to systems, because the system, the overall system, is more than the sum of its parts. So think about your consciousness. It's more than the sum of your parts. And therefore, societal systems are very much the same. They have intent. So physical systems don't have intent. They just react to a set of rules. So have intents. You've got encoded norms built within them, which now sort of regulate the system as they move through. You've got many subsystems within the systems. And then you've got concepts of path dependency, which comes back, and that can be the economy which you've got. It'll be the values within the society, the impact of religion through it, and a whole range of other factors as well. So now the thing with this is, now if you start cause and effect, which is the way most governments operate, you go back, try and change the cause. If it's a system, you're going to have all these other impacts as well. So really, understanding our system is really important. And when people make statements like, we'll make America great again, you can never go back to the system of the 50s. It's past. You'll have some other system. And so once systems change, they can never go back to what they were. It's continually evolving process.
That is really interesting. So it reminds me of this idea that this, I don't know, analysis of what are we looking at in terms of what's the organism, if you will, right? Like if you take a termite colony, right? If you look at one individual termite, in isolation, you could consider that to be a particular insect, but when they operate together as a colony, some would argue that the colony itself is the organism, and that the organism, that there are certain termites that are just to protect the queen, right? And that they have to protect the queen in order to continue to propagate. Are you saying that society is a system, and so it's not necessarily looking at and analyzing one human or one family, but society as a whole is the organism and how it operates and lives and has its own sort of separate, maybe influences and objectives by which that it's operating, and that we've just totally missed that perspective? Is that
exactly? It's sort of I think that's look, Brandon. That's a great way of putting it. So if we think about it, we're parts of a system. Could be part of a family system. That's an easy one to think about. We're part of the ecosystem of the company which we're in. Our company's then part of another system, which would be the business system. That business system's part of a national system, or also an international system. That system is part of the international system of humanity. Humanity is part of the broader ecosystem which exists. Our planet spins inside another system, which you can see as our solar system, which then it spins inside a galaxy, which then spins inside the universe. And maybe, on it goes.
Yeah, so that's fascinating. So are you suggesting that there's some ignorance in terms of there are different, this is very hard to articulate, but we need to be mindful of the fact that we have to analyze and understand things at different levels in terms of systems, or in terms of what outcome we're trying to okay.
So you need to understand what you're trying to accomplish. So if you're doing a systems analysis, pick the system. And the system is also a subsystem, because that system lies inside some other system. So it's a subsystem. That system will have flows with the many other systems as well. So there's no such thing as a closed system. It has got inputs coming from other places as well. So you have to understand the relationship of the systems around it, and then way it works internally. And you'll have other subsystems within it as well. So from that angle, it gets really complex. But you can come back to simple ways of being able to understand it. So if you look at the approach with positive peace, and you come back to those 8 pillars of positive peace, it's a shortcut to be able to look into a system that works pretty well. System from that angle, you look at it from concept, and this could be, you can use these same terms for a community, you can say same terms for a nation. So well-functioning government, that might be the way the tribal leader operates and the elders within the tribe, simple as that. So well-functioning government, strong business environment. Most people in the peace realm miss the importance of business, because business really generates all the wealth in society. Governments tax it and use it as the social service. It's not a bad thing to do, but the wealth within society all originates from business. So second one's strong business environment, equitable distribution of resources. That doesn't mean equal. It's the social contract. So the social contract in Sweden, somewhat different than the social contract in the United States, but it's the social contract. Acceptance of the rights of others. That acceptance of the rights of others, again, comes back, and it's within the social context of the society within which you live. We like to see Western societies as progressive. There's certain lot of rights we don't accept. So it's all within acceptance of the rights of others in a social context. Free flow of information, that can be epitomised by the press, or even this podcast fits under free flow of information. High levels of human capital, that's more than just education, but high levels of human capital. Low levels of corruption, and that's really about efficiency. The less corruption there is, the more efficient the society is, and therefore the more wealthy. And the final one is good relationships with neighbours. So that good relationships with neighbours could be another country, it's the national level. If it's now at the community level, it could be another ethnic group, it could be another religious group. So that's basically it.
I think I got them all. So well-functioning government, healthy business environment, equitable distribution of resources, acceptance of the rights of others, free flow of information, high level of human capital, low corruption, and good relationships with neighbors.
So if you just went into the internet and searched possibly peace, it'll come up. You'll get it on the first page, and if you search positive peace report, that's what it is. So that's up there. Yeah, if you're interested,
we'll link that.
If any of the audience is interested, it's there.
I think so. Well, it's really interesting to me, and we'll link this at this part of the podcast and put it up on the screen for everybody watching. I've got a couple of questions. So, to those that say, you appear to be sort of providing the definition of the sort of an optimal society. Who are you to do that? You say, well, it's the data that does that, not us, right? Is that so? Those are all set based on the empirical evidence and data that you have found. Is that right?
That's right. So what separates the Institute from Economics and Peace from other areas of peace is work we do is pretty much data-driven and derived. We really avoid, we're trying to make moral interpretations around peace and around the conditions of society. Not that we haven't all got morals and values, and our values are probably very similar to most people working on peace, but the differentiation with the Institute is we're data-driven.
It's objective, yeah. So I love that. And then with the acceptance of the rights of others, how do you guys define rights in that?
So it's relative on a society. It's relative to the people within the society and what they think is appropriate.
I gotcha.
So one of the ways when we're doing workshops around this, and we had workshops running last year had projects in 150 countries. So just give you an idea of the spread of it. So when you're in a particular community, then it's up to that community to determine what their values are. It's not for us to impose it. So, for example, acceptance of the rights of others. I want to run down the streets of Atlanta naked.
Right.
Most people aren't going to allow me to do that, are they?
No.
So it's, again, now, if you were in Germany, for example, or France, you naked people, you're sunbathing in a local park are okay.
Sure.
So now we could we could move into some really contentious ones on this, but we won't.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So it's sort of the collective perception of whether everyone's rights are.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. No, that makes sense. That was the only one that jumped out.
And what's acceptable, unacceptable, and changes
sure.
through time, and changes from society to society.
Right. No, that makes sense. I could see how that, I mean, that's purely objective, is generally whether a particular, I mean, gosh, and you got my wheels turning because I'm thinking this is at so many different levels, right? This could be at a family level, a neighborhood level, a community level, a city level, a state, you know, all the different, like you're talking about, but whether there's general, go ahead.
So we use the positive peace framework in all sorts of settings. So we've used it for the integration of FARC rebels in Colombia. We've worked on the relationships between religious leaders in northern Iraq. We've worked with it with the Aboriginal communities within Australia, various diasporas which have come in to Australia as well as immigrants. Work with it in that area. Work with it within the policing areas. We've been Mexico, one of the states in Mexico, Jalisco State, probably run 500 workshops on it now. That'd be another example.
That's amazing.
We've used it in Africa, with tribal pastors. We're virtually mainly illiterate, and all sorts of settings now. So the architecture itself, with the 8 pillars, when you transcribe them, seems to work within any culture. But the core thing is you've got to let the culture itself determine the values. And so, like, it's well-functioning government again, because you've got so many different ways of being able to organise in different parts of the world. It's up to them to work out how they think, what they think well-functioning government is.
Interesting. So would you say that this framework tends to work in lots of different scenarios? How do you, I'm just going to make an assumption here, since everything is objective based on data, how do you determine sort of the success rate or whether it's working and by what margin?
Sure. Okay. So I'll just give you one example. This is no exaggeration at all. So we train what we call as IEP ambassadors. So that's a course which goes through our work. It's about a 6-week course, part-time, online, and for free. And so we tend to, in intakes, we tend to do it online. We get some thousands of people doing this every year. And so with that, the number we asked at the end of the last one, we asked, would you, and this was about 1,000 people intake, would you recommend it to a friend? 99.2% said yes. 92% said this was helpful in my professional career, which blew me away. Yeah. So that's that. And then obviously when we run the workshops, we've got standardised the sort of before and after type surveys as well. And so
you know what you've done, Steve? If you get into a conversation, you, the proverbial you, not you in particular, about societal issues or the Middle East or, gun rights, anything that there's going to be people that have differing opinions, et cetera, you end up getting to the point where somebody says, look, it's just complicated. And it seems to me like you have figured out for those scenarios, you've figured out the analytical approach that's based on empirical data for how to address those situations.
So what you do is the framework and the way we implement it is positive in nature, and it's forward-looking. You can't change the past, it's already there. So what you do is you take a problem, which the group commonly shares, and then you work out an approach going forward to solve the problem.
Gosh,
that's basically it. So I'll give you an example. We did a workshop many years ago in Tunis, and what it was funded by the European Union or part of the European Union. There's an awful lot of parts of it, and So we brought in young leaders, these people 25 to 35 from different cities in Libya. This was the height of the civil war when all the cities are fighting each other. And so what happened then is we brought them in the room, we then looked at what do you have to do to build peace in your city. Okay, that was the posing question. The end of it, they said, wow, we never expected to be sitting in the same room as people from these other cities, let alone agreeing on the solutions. And because we didn't go back and look at the causes of the war and work out the rights and wrongs of them, all of them had the same issues in their cities. And they were practical things, like being able to get the garbage cleaned up off the streets, getting the water running again, being able to stop criminal elements operating within their cities. So it was pretty
That's unreal.
Pretty mind-blowing. But you have to pose the question properly. You have to look for the common ground moving forward. But the framework itself gives a systemic view of what it's like.
Yeah. It's almost
we haven't tried it on the gun violence in the States with opposing sides, but there would be, unless you pick the really people that the far out left and far out right, you're going to find there'd be some middle ground and some policies you could do. Maybe not ideal for either party, but there'd be there would be some middle ground and policy. So when you're looking particularly in the States at the moment, and where you can see the divergence between the left and the right, and I hate the terms left and right, I think they've moved far beyond it, but you see the divergence, being able to find ways of being able to meet in the middle ground on issues, I think in the States now is incredibly important.
Absolutely. I was actually just on another previous podcast talking with a military vet about democracy and its fragility and how it's not necessarily well understood by generations of today, that it's not just a given, it's very fragile, and it can be very easily broken. But it seems that, and I would have to, I guess, think through it. Well, let me ask this question. Has there been some sort of systems level issue that you found that this framework just doesn't really quite fit with, or isn't the best option for, or is it pretty universal?
So far, it pretty much fits wherever we utilise and use it. It's the more complex the system, the more difficult and the more vexed the issue, the more difficult it is to actually get outcomes. That's true for any sort of framework, I guess. I guess that some areas, if you're looking at in physical world, it's developed for human societal systems. So I think that'd be the best way of being able to look at it. But it probably applies to applicable to biological systems as well. But anywhere where you've got human involvement, that's where you'd be looking at, because that's the human element. And we as human beings, we can't do anything without it having the human element.
Right. Gosh, well, yeah, we've used the word profound to describe what you're working on. Impactful also comes to mind. But look, speaking of that, you've been nominated for 2 Nobel Peace Prizes for your work in and around these types of areas. Can you explain to the audience what specifically led to those? First of all, congratulations. I think there are very few people on the planet that are Nobel Peace Prize nominees. So obviously you are working on impactful things. What are the 2 specific areas that you were working on that led to those nominations?
I think really you come back to it. There's certain people in the world who can nominate someone for a Nobel Peace Prize, and they get about 300, 400 people nominated each year. So look, there's a reasonable number of people in it, and it's basically someone likes your work. But it's been nominated for the reasons we've gone through here. It's basically understanding the factors which measure, create peace, and then to creating programs to work on peace, in a nutshell.
I love it. I love it. That's a perfect summary. Well, so I want to make sure to give you time, to the extent that you would like to take it, to look, if just imagine that there's 100,000 people watching this. If you had the opportunity to shout something from the rooftops, if you would, right, or to give a message, or direct people to, like, the IEP website, is there something that you feel like isn't well understood, or that you would like to make sure that people are thinking about or moving towards?
Well, I think when we talk about the peace in the way we've been talking about it today, it seems, wow, that's so far removed from me. But peace is just an everyday occurrence. And it's the interaction of when you walk into the coffee shop to get your coffee in the morning. You smile at the person behind the counter, say thank you, have a great day, leave them 50-cent tip. It's the little things which create peace. So it's the ability to not be too judgmental. We all make judgments, that's for sure. But not be too judgmental. Let other people have their space in which they can think and be. And a sense of letting go, a bit of forgiveness. That doesn't mean you have to forgive everything, but the human level, the interactions with others, those things help. Give people, I think, in the age we're living in at the moment, we've got this concept of cancel culture, other expressions like that, and a lot of it is really true. Most people are flawed in some shape, way, or form. Look at ourselves. Most people don't. Most people don't. And so it's just those little things do create a more peaceful world.
Yeah, gosh. That is extremely insightful. Well, so if for those that are looking to learn more, or that are interested in potentially getting involved or helping out, where would you direct them?
So there's a number of ways. So we've got a website called visionofhumanity.org. You can go there. You can also go to the website economicsandpeace.org. But just simple searches on the internet, we come up on the first page for many, many different things. So just search the Global Peace Index, search positive peace, search me. That'll all take you down the same river, to the same place.
I love it. I love it. Well, look, like I've said a couple of times now, we'll make sure that these links are provided for the audience. Are there? I feel like I've taken so much of your time, and I'm so appreciative and thankful for that. And so I want to be mindful and respectful. Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you were hoping to talk about?
I think it's been a pretty thorough interview, Brandon. We didn't actually really cover the questions we had, but it was a great interview. Yeah, you really took it down some interesting directions, I think. So I think that's it. No, I thought from my angle it felt pretty good.
Well, good. Well, look, you said something.
I think your questions made me sound a lot more intelligent than I actually am.
Well, I don't know about that. You're one of the. I'm not kidding. Halfway through this, I said, this guy's got to be one of the smartest people I've ever interviewed, because you're thinking on a different, plane, or thinking on a different level. But you mentioned earlier that you're a very instinctual person, and you also mentioned about business plan is great for about a minute, right? Or any type of plan is great until you get punched in the mouth, as I like to say. And so I often have questions and things that I think the interview, will go. But I'm always, I let instinct sort of drive the discussion, because my hope is that an audience member would want to be asking the same types of questions that come up in the moment. And if we don't touch on those, then it's sort of disappointing. But gosh, Steve, I could have another 2 hours of discussions with you. I think you're fascinating, and I think that the work that you're working on it doesn't get more important in terms of impact on our species than what you're working on. So I applaud you for that. Appreciate you doing what you're doing, and thank goodness that we've got people like you that can figure some of these things out and help us collectively to become better.
Oh, well, look, Brandon, thanks for the interview. Thanks for the nice words. Like I said, things just happened to me.
Well, that's also, you're in addition to being extremely intelligent, you're also very humble, which is refreshing as well. So look, those two things together are a lethal and powerful combination. So I guess it's not surprising that you've done a bunch of this stuff. I'm going to table the rest of my questions because you've been so gracious with your time.
Don't forget, everybody, you can find Boundary Breakers in a lot of places. You can watch our episodes on the Boundary Breakers YouTube channel, or you can listen to each podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or any of the other major podcasting platforms. Thanks for listening.